Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for CHSN. We're brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. With Charlie Roumeliotis, I am Pat Boyle. Hawks back in action Friday night. They will host the Tampa Bay Lightning. How you doing today, Charlie?
What's going on? It's weird that feels like we have a whole week off. But like Connor McDavid said the other day, it's not like we can go to Cabo. So we're still here churning out some podcasts.
That's right. We were at Fifth Third Arena earlier this morning for Blackhawks practice. Some interesting developments there. We'll get to that coming up in just a bit. But you know what? It's never too early to look ahead because we're in the rebuild to the NHL draft in June. And this is the time of the season where some of the draft and prospect analysts start to put out their first rankings of the season or their mid-season rankings. And Bob McKenzie is one of the trusted leaders in this department. And he put out his with TSN, and he's got the defenseman Matthew Schaefer as the number one ranked player in this upcoming draft, the lefty D, who's 6'2", 183 pounds. He is injured. He is not slated to return until the end of March or early April. So, he plays for the Erie Otters. I don't know if he's going to see any more action. Your thoughts as you just perused McKenzie's mid-season rankings, Charlie?
Yeah, when it got released, Bob McKenzie's rankings are always the most trusted around the NHL because he speaks to 10 higher scouts across the NHL, and so it's the most accurate depiction of what some other NHL teams might be thinking. And so when I saw the headline, it was like Matthew Schaefer, number one unanimous player on his board. And it was like, wow, that's an interesting development. It feels like we were trending that way, but going into the year, most of the talk was about how James Hagens was likely going to be the first overall pick. And so Matthew Schaefer has really propelled himself to that number one spot. And it's almost like you have to talk yourself out of Matthew Schaefer at this point if you get the number one overall pick versus convincing yourself to take him. And so I thought the interesting thing about Matthew Schaefer specifically, well, two things. One, he missed being eligible for the 2026 draft by 10 days. So he's a very young 17 years old, and he's the unanimous number one consensus pick right now, which I think is saying a lot about his upside. But when you see some of the scouting reports or some of the scouts, what they said about Schaefer, it's like, think a left shot Cale Makar. And it's like, okay, like even if he's half of that or 25% of that, I think you'll take that. And then some other comparisons were Scott Niedermayer and Miro Heiskanen. So it's like, you think about that. And if you're Chicago, if you end up getting the number one overall pick, I know you got Artem Levshinov, and you have Kevin Korchinski and Sam Renzel, and Alex Vlasic is going to be a piece here for the long term. Boy, it's going to be really difficult for them not to seriously consider taking Schaefer, despite the defenseman pipeline bursting for Chicago.
So my understanding, talked to Corey Pronman last night, and he said this is not a draft where it's Bedard or Celebrini the surefire number one pick. Schaefer may be ranked one, but he is not in the tier, according to Pronman, of a Celebrini or a Bedard who were in that generational player category. But by all accounts, everybody is comparing him to some of the best defensemen, offensive defensemen in the game. Now, he also has size. You talk about his age being young, on the younger side, 6'2", 183 at, 17, about, to turn 18, that's saying something. So it begs the question, if you stick to the adage of drafting the best player available, do the Hawks go that route with Vlasic in the pipeline, with Levshunov in the pipeline, with Kevin Korchinski, with Sam Renzel on his way, and with guys like Crevier and Nolan Allen and Wyatt Kaiser, and we'll tell you about Ethan Del Mastro in a little bit. You're beginning to have, it's by far the strongest part of your organization's makeup. Your defense is loaded with talent, but there's only 6 spots. And, I just rattled off, 9 names or 10 names, and we haven't even mentioned Schaefer. So, on the thought of, if he is Makar-esque, Heiskanen-esque, Niedermeyer-esque, or Quinn Hughes, or what, if he is that type of defenseman, I probably would draft him. And I would then, or I would consider trading back if I didn't feel he was bona fide in that Makar type of discussion, if he's where they thought Levshunov was last year, as far as a hit or a miss, I would then trade down a couple of picks and grab the forward that I thought was, best suited for my franchise going forward.
Yeah. So when I was reading the scouting report on Schaefer about what some of the scouts were telling McKenzie, and it's like, he can run a power play, he can walk the blue line and get shots through the point. Without the puck, he can defend physically or cerebrally. He has a great stick. His gap control is excellent. And then the kicker, he's a premier penalty killer, and his game is suited to all situations in all 3 zones. So it's like,
he helps your team in so many ways.
Right.
We know how important special teams is in this league. Well, he checks both boxes. He can run your power play, and he can eat up minutes on your PK. Obviously, he's going to be in heavy minutes against top lines. When you have that dynamic defenseman who is like a fourth forward, I almost feel like, and then can walk the line and get shots through. It's in this day and age where, you're trying to generate offense, it's such an asset to have a defenseman who can join. And not, when we say join the rush, there's joining the rush, and then there's doing damage when you join the rush, or when you decide to pinch and do some things in the offensive zone, or, God forbid you be a part of a shorthanded situation on 2-on-1. If you've got all those assets, that to me would be hard to pass up.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I think if the Blackhawks feel, or whichever team feels, that he is a bona fide number 1 power play, all situations guy that's going to log 25 plus minutes a night, you take him at number 1 overall. But if you feel the separation from Schaefer to whether it's James Higgins or Michael Misa or Porter Martone is small, then I think you can teeter into what is a more pressing need. Like, if that's kind of the separator. But I have always been a proponent of take the best player available, and then you figure the rest out. And I've used this example in the past, but in the 2015 NHL draft, it's not apples to apples comparisons, but I think about the Boston Bruins. They were going through a retooling phase of they still had Bergeron, Krejci, Chara, right? And so they were going through a transitional phase, and they had 3 consecutive first-round picks. in the 2015 draft. It was 13th overall, 14th overall, and 15th overall, like 3 straight in a row. The 3 guys they drafted was a defenseman named Jacob Saboro, which I don't think he ever played a game in the NHL. It was Jake DeBrusk with 14th overall. And right after that, it was a right winger named Zachary Senshin. And 2 guys that we've never heard of. And then the other guy, Jake DeBrusk, who's a fine player, but he's not an impactful type top 6 forward. Immediately after that, the 3 picks, Matt Barzal, Kyle Connor, and Thomas Chabot. And it was center, left wing, defenseman. And so when I look at the Boston drafting 2 wingers, how much of that did they think, well, we already have Bergeron and we already have Krejci, so we have our first two line centers. Let's go draft wingers to support them. And in theory, it makes sense, but they could have had a guy like Matt Barzal if they didn't maybe talk themselves out of not drafting a center because they already had a surplus at center. So I think you take the best player available, you figure the rest out, and if Schaefer ends up being, again, Cale Makar-esque is just like, he's a generational defenseman, but even if he's like half of that, I think you absolutely take Schaefer and then you figure out how you're going to make the other pieces work as far as trying to find a consistent line mate or running mate with Connor Bedard, because that's the question. Like, who's going to be the Taves to the Kane, the Malkin to the Crosby, the Rantanen to the McKinnon, the Draisaitl to the McDavid. Like, Connor Bedard, we don't really know who that guy is going to be next to him or in the line before him to kind of provide that 1-2 punch. And those are the conversations that Chicago, I'm sure, are going to be having between now and the NHL draft.
And you're in an interesting situation where you don't know if you're going to land the number 1 overall pick right now. As we tape this, San Jose has the best odds at the number 1 pick. So the Hawks could pick 1, 2, 3, or 4, right?
Yep.
They can drop 2 spots. So there would be, in all likelihood, Schaefer, if you're at 2 or below, he won't be there. And so when you look at your depth chart at the defensive position and you say, okay, we've got redundancy here. We're going to probably, you don't know you're going to get Schaefer. You don't know if he's going to be available. So you can't even begin to move pieces prior to this deadline. You have to wait until, the draft lottery or the draft day to possibly negotiate and move around. And, maybe if you're lucky enough to draft 1 overall and you indeed believe Schaefer is the slam dunk pick, I would look at my recent defenseman draft picks and I would consider moving one of them for assets to move me up in this draft, maybe take that Tampa pick. That'll probably be in what we're thinking the 20s somewhere.
Yeah, and it might even be later if they
could be
end
later.
Up going, yeah,
could be later. But maybe let's for what's in giggles. Let's say it's 25. You might be able to package one of your first round defensemen, and I mean that's a lot. I don't know. I will say this: what you're saying though, Kyle Davidson has shown he will do that if he feels like there's a guy that he likes, because we saw it last year with Chicago trying to trade into Columbus's spot to draft Ivan Demidov because the Blackhawks really liked both Levshinov and Demidov. And so if there is a situation where the Hawks are really in love with a guy, I think Davidson has made it known that he'll do whatever it takes to at least attempt to go get that player. Like let's just talk top 4 right now. Levshinov is going to be in your top 4. Vlasic is going to be in your top 4. Sam Renzel is going to be in your top 4. Right? Those are 3 slam dunks, going to be in the top 4 in one way, shape, or form, correct?
Yep. Yeah, you would think so.
You would think. Then that leaves, if you are taking Schaefer becomes, the one of the 4, or he's in your top 4. Now you begin to say, okay, who's 5, 6? And, I'm not saying you give up on Korchinski, but you begin to, that's the one that's looking like, okay, first round pick. Where is he? Where's he going to play? You don't want to see him on a third pairing. That would be a great luxury to have, but I don't think that you would look at that as bang for your buck. And so, it might be somebody like that you would consider moving to help your team in other areas, to move up, to get that complimentary winger for Connor Bedard. So, traditionally, we haven't seen a lot of movement in the first round of the draft, but since the Kyle Davidson came on the scene, we have seen maneuvering. We have seen the one draft where they had no picks going in and they ended up making 3 in the first.
Yeah. And even the last year's draft, I know he was unsuccessful in trading for Columbus's pick, but then he trades up to draft Merrick Vaneker and gets that extra third first round pick. So Kyle has options, right? Like when you have that much draft ammo, you have options to either load up the picks to maybe increase your chances of hitting on guys, or you can say, okay, this guy is in this tier and we have the draft assets to potentially go after said player. But I will say this, I think it's still a tad premature to peg guys in certain roles when you don't know just exactly like what they're going to be yet at the NHL level. Like Artem Levchinov, you think, okay, top pairing guy, you don't draft a defenseman at number 2 overall if you don't expect him to be number 2, right? But with Sam Rinzel, it's like, wow, he's been amazing in college. Sophomore year specifically, he's up for the Hobey Baker Award, like which legitimately he has a chance at winning. And so you look at that and you're like, okay, cool. Ideally, you see him as a guy that's going to be whether it's 1 or 2, like the right shot guy running a power play, whether that's the first unit or second. But until you don't see it in the pros, it's hard to start moving guys out. And so I think as the developments of all these younger players, like once they start knocking on the door at the NHL level, then you can kind of get a sense of, okay, which guys can we slot in and which guys are maybe likely sliding in our depth chart that are potentially movable to go get us some pieces up front.
We'll get more, obviously, into the draft minutia as we progress in this season and we get closer to the draft, and of course around the draft lottery when we find out exactly where they'll be selecting. The one thing I wanted just to mention, because it's a vital position, and yet you don't see many of them taken in the first round. Goalie, Joshua Ravensbergen, by McKenzie, by Pronman, by respected draft analysts, prospect analysts. They only have one goalie given a first round grade, and that's Ravensbergen. He is a 6'5" plus 190-pound goalie who's in the WHL in Prince George. Pronman said on the radio last night that he could be a goalie taken in the top 8 or 9. So
wow,
yeah, he compared him to Kosa, who the Red Wings took a couple years back.
Interesting. So McKenzie has him 28th on his rankings,
right?
So, but again, if there are teams that are really coveting, like, hey, we need a goaltender, then you go out and get your guy. But I think, though, this is my philosophy on goaltenders. I would draft one every single year because they're so fluky. Like whether you draft one in the second round or in the seventh round, I would always draft a goaltender, and just they take so long to develop. And I look at some of the recent history from like Vegas Golden Knights winning with Adin Hill as the starter, and he was like the sixth string going into the year, or
Florida.
like Florida, or like Edmonton last year, one game away, and it was Stuart Skinner when Jack Campbell was their prize signing, but Stuart Skinner was the guy that got him there. So it's like goaltenders are very fluky unless it's an Andre Vasilevsky or a Jake Ottinger or one of those guys. I'm always of the mindset of you can go find a goalie out there when that's like if that's the final missing piece. And so if you don't have that bona fide number one starting goaltender, the best odds are going out and get a 1A, 1B, and you just keep riding the hot hand, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm with you. I was going to bring that up as far as philosophy of goaltending. In theory, yeah, you would like to have that luxury of taking a goalie every year, almost like taking that backup quarterback. And it's like, oh, is he Brock Purdy,
right.
And you stumble into it. Or I've used the analogy of closers. I do feel again, not the Vasilevsky types, not the Shesterkin types, but most goalies are like closers in baseball, where one year they are on top of the world. The next year you're like, what happened to him?
Yeah.
So if it's that way at the National Hockey League level, which is 6 or 7 years down the road from being drafted, how much certainty can we have in a pick, of a 17 or 18-year-old? But again, if you somehow have the scouting that points to him being a generational type of goalie, then, you pull the trigger. But I am with you. I feel like Panger was telling me a story today, Ben Bishop being in St. Louis's system when they had Jake Elliott and
Jake Allen or Brian Elliott.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brian Elliott.
Yeah.
Jake Allen and Brian Elliott. And they gave up on Ben, and they traded, and Tampa acquired him when Steve Yzerman was the GM there. And so, it goes to show you, a player of that ilk who went on to win cups, who went on to, I think he won a Vezina or so. Like you can acquire talent at the goalie position, and with the hot and coldness of the play of the 1A, 1B, I think it's something that you can allot for in your salary cap structure, and don't necessarily have to roll the dice in a first round situation. As I mentioned, Ravensburgen being the only goalie that universally has a first round pick grade.
Yeah. And the good news is if you're Chicago, whatever that pick might be, the Toronto pick, if the goalie is there, and even though he might not be a guy that you play within the next 2-3 years, like he's a guy that you're like, okay, even if we draft this goalie in the first round or near the end of the first round, if he's available, you don't mind if it's going to take him a few years to marinate, because it's going to kind of coincide with the timeline of the rebuild. And also, like to kind of put a bow on the importance of forward and defense versus the goalie position. Like the goaltending position is a really important position, but it's one of the positions that you can find on the market. Like I think of after the Blackhawks had won the 2010 Stanley Cup, San Jose had offer sheeted Antoni Niemi and Nicholas Hjalmarsson. And it was like, which one did the Blackhawks choose? They're like, well, Nicholas Hjalmarsson is far more valuable because you can't find another Hjalmarsson out there, versus the Hawks had Corey Crawford in the system. they didn't know Corey Crawford was going to be a 2-time Stanley Cup champion and a guy that had the career that he did. But at the time, they're like, the defensive stay-at-home defenseman and one of the elite at that is far more valuable to us than re-signing Antiniemi, even though he put together a Stanley Cup run for Chicago. So I don't mind whatever. If the Blackhawks feel like they want a goalie at the end of the first round, I wouldn't mind that either, even if it might take him 3-4 years to get to the NHL.
Okay, let's switch gears from draft talk to the current roster. And we've really enjoyed watching the chemistry between Tyler Bertuzzi and Connor Bedard, and recently Frank Nazar, who's joined that line. I spoke with Tyler at practice on Thursday. Here's that conversation.
So you lead the team with 17 goals, but 12 of those have come in the last 20 games. What has been the difference that's been clicking for you offensively?
I honestly have no idea. In the past, I've kind of started slow and kind of finished strong. So, maybe that's it. Obviously, some chemistry with the line mates and the power play is going really well. So, I think just a mix of everything.
You were put together with Connor on December 21st, late in the game. You guys connected on a couple. Were you surprised how quickly it came together?
We did a little bit in training camp, and then we didn't play together for a while during the season. I figured at some point we would obviously get a look together, and we capitalized on the opportunity. And it took us a little bit to kind of get in the groove, but I think we found it. And, we've been grooving pretty well.
The backdoor play where you go down to one knee, has that always been in your repertoire, or is that something that has evolved over time?
I just try to, get as much pressure on my stick as I can, and, if it misses my stick, then it might hit my leg or my skate and go in, so it's just kind of extra backup.
There's a lot more to it as far as the timing aspect of it and trying to make sure a defender's stick isn't in the lane. Has that taken time to kind of perfect over the years?
Yeah, I'm actually kind of just started doing that this year a little bit, just trying to get his stick out of the way or lift it at the last second. And, when you have, Bedard looking at you back door, he can read when I'm about to lift his stick, and, or Teravainen, and, they make these plays that are hard to make, and I just have to tap them in.
You're in year one of a 4-year deal. Obviously, the numbers aren't where you want in the standings, but is Chicago starting to feel a little bit more like home? You've got a young family. There's a lot of things that go in play here, but are things starting to feel more like, okay, this is my hockey home?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, it takes time moving to a new city, new house. The kids have moved, I don't even know how many times in the last couple of years. Hopefully we're here for the long haul, and they can get settled in, and we're starting to feel a lot like home now. Settled in, everything's going well, and just got to adjust to the big city now.
For the second straight year, you've cut the hair. Do you care to tell the story behind that a little bit?
It was just my friend from Michigan when I was playing in Detroit. She's a hairdresser, and we just decided the one time to donate it, and I've done it ever since. I get my hair cut once a year, and I might as well donate it to a good cause. Kids with cancer that are looking for, to put a smile on their face, whether it's, the simplest thing is just some hair.
So it was great to catch up with Tyler. I kind of wondered where he was at as far as, year one of a 4-year deal. And, obviously he knew what he was getting into, but now that you're in it, some 30 or some 40 plus games, what's that like? And how is his wife adapting? They've got 2 young kids, and, he kind of was like, yeah, we're trying to get you. He goes, it's not easy. And it can't be, he's trying to work on his craft and get situated on a team where he's trying to find a role. And, at home, they're trying to set up life in yet another city when he's, bounced around a bit here the last few years. I thought it was cool to hear him talk about kind of some of the stuff he's added to that going down to one knee, backdoor deflection in, how he's worked on the part of taking away the defender's stick right before he goes down to it to assure the open lane. That's something that, yes, he makes his bread and butter, his living around the paint, but that's where he's even evolving this skill that he has. And then I thought it was very cool for him to share that, he's gets one haircut a year, and that it goes into, making wigs or what have you for kids who are battling cancer. So, it's, I guess my question to you, as we were talking about the draft a little bit earlier and finding, Connor's, his Taves or his Kane, so to speak, his Batman and Robin. Do you think Bertuzzi can fill the role of his net front winger for the next 2 to 3 years? Do you think that is a long-term solution there? Or do you think more or less he's an upgrade on Kurashev? Yes, they're clicking now, but to take Bedard to the greatest heights, ultimately there's going to be a ceiling.
Yeah, I think ideally Bertuzzi would be the really solid 3 on the line and not his 2, right? So like ideally you find Connor a guy like a kind of thinking like if they put Teravainen and Bertuzzi on a line together, that Bedard and Teravainen are like the 1 and 2 where they can play off each other, and Bertuzzi is the 3 where he's doing the dirty work for the 1 and the 2. And so right now that combo has been awesome. It was funny watching the power play today, them work on practice. He did the same move and he scored on the goal. And so it was funny talking to Connor Bedard after practice, and we were mentioning about how Bertuzzi had perfected a craft, and Connor, like half joking, half serious, was like, we got to stop talking about it because people are going to start picking up on it. But if you're scouting the Blackhawks, that's a move that they've been going to lately. And hey, it's one thing to kind of hide it, but it's also like, look at how Alex Ovechkin has scored all his goals. It's like you can be like, hey, he's going to score here from this faceoff circle, and it's one thing to talk about it, but it's like he's still very good at scoring from that area, even though that's where he's going to score from.
Yeah, it's funny how like it was my question, and I could tell I felt exactly the way you described it, like joking, not joking, kind of like don't jinx me, kid. Anyways, so that's the story on Tyler Bertuzzi. We also had some roster moves as Ethan Del Mastro was called up from Rockford, and that means there's 8 defensemen on the roster, correct?
Yeah, 8 active defensemen on the active roster. And so we got that news right before practice. So I figured, okay, Alec Martinez might be back on the shelf because he missed yesterday with a maintenance day. So I'm like, maybe he's dealing with an injury. I know Connor Murphy is out, but he's been on IR, so they didn't have to do a corresponding move. And so when I was watching practice, I was like, Martinez is on the ice, and there's 8 defensemen. There are 4 guys in red, 4 guys in white. So I think the weird part about this is that Rockford now only has 7 defensemen, and they traded for Dmitry Kuzmin last week for Isaac Phillips, and he hasn't even joined the team yet because I'm assuming he's dealing with visa issues or whatever. So Rockford has 6 defensemen right now, and I think one of them got hurt in the last game. So they might be down to 5. And so it's a little weird that the Hawks ended up calling up an 8th defenseman when they have 7 healthy ones. Rockford doesn't play again until I think Saturday against the Wolves. So maybe this was I think Rockford was on the road yesterday. And so maybe it's a situation where the Hawks plan on sending someone back, whether it's Nolan Allen. I have no idea. But if not, it is a little weird, or it is interesting that the Hawks are running with 8 defensemen when there wasn't really a need to call him up. And oh, by the way, at practice today, Del Mastro was on a pairing with Nolan Allen, but he was on the fourth pairing, so he wasn't even in the lineup, it appeared to be. So I'm not sure what exactly is going on there, but maybe we'll get clarity in the next day or two.
Yeah, I mean, do you know if Rockford's game Saturday is away or home?
It's at home against the Wolves.
See, that's even more puzzling because, like I could see if the Blackhawks were leaving, today to play in Tampa and they were going to make a move tomorrow of sending somebody, like I can understand why they wanted to have more bodies as they embark on a trip. But the Hawks are home Friday and Sunday, and so is Rockford. Yeah, something's up. It doesn't something doesn't pass the eye test here. Could there be a deal in the works? I don't know. Like you said, to think that Rockford is depleted and Blackhawks have a surplus, and not to mention, I think it seems like Connor Murphy's somewhat close to returning. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that much further. It's and it also might be, working the salary cap too a little bit. I don't. There might be a factor of that, but we kind of asked Anders about it, and he didn't seem like he was going to reveal too much about what was going on. Just kind of like, yeah, that's it. We're gonna have 8.
Yeah, and it's different too because. So Pat Maroon, he has missed the last few days with a back injury. And so maybe you thought, oh, okay, Teravainen missed practice yesterday because of a maintenance, and then Jason Dickinson was sick. So then my brain goes to maybe they're going to run with 11 forwards and 7 defensemen against Tampa because Maroon is out with an injury and maybe Dickinson was sick and they're like, we don't know if he's going to be available or whatever. But then I go to practice. I'm like, oh, Maroon's on the ice. And it's like, well, so they got 13 healthy forwards, and Dickinson was on the ice too, and Teravainen. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think Maroon is going to be back tomorrow night. I get the impression that it's going to take a little bit longer for him to return. So we will see on that. And we will monitor the surplus of D-men right now up with the Blackhawks. And it also coincides with guys like Crevier playing really, really dependable hockey and, being given a lot of ice time. And I don't think anybody had on their bingo card that Louis Crevier would be in the role he's in right now, but he's making the most of it.
Yeah, that Vlasic-Crevier pairing, one of the tallest pairings in NHL history, but they've also been playing well. And you think of Crevier more as maybe a 6th defenseman, but the fact that he's been in a second pairing role with Vlasic, he's been impressive over the last few games here.
All right, let's talk about the special visitor at practice, Stephen Foltin, a 13-year-old who has battled cancer, who is currently in remission and lost his leg during his battle. And the amazing story after his leg was amputated, 2 days after it was amputated, he made sure he was in the building for Chris Chelios's jersey retirement. This kid is a lot of energy, a lot of positivity. He captivated Fifth Third Arena. He came out on the ice in his on his sled. He's taken up sled hockey over the last about 5 months ago. And Charlie, in a season where it's been a lot of dejected, not a lot of smiling, not a lot of laughs because of where they are in the standings, today was a day to prioritize things in life and see what really matters. And there were plenty of smiles and, guys like Alex Vlasic trying his big frame on an ice, on a sled and not being very successful at it. So from your vantage point, what did you see?
Yeah, it was awesome. I saw that Stephen was getting ready to hit the ice, and it's like the Blackhawks crowded around the door where he was going to come out, and it looked like he was getting ready to come out, and like all the players started chanting Stephen, Stephen, and so then Anders Sorensen introduces him. Nick Foligno ends up going up to introduce himself and also shares he's going to be in attendance on Sunday. Have some sort of special role there. And so it was a really cool scene at practice. And then we got inside the locker room, and Alex Vlasic came off the ice. And so it was Vlasic, Colton Dock, and Wyatt Kaiser. All three of them hopped on sleds themselves and tried to experience it. And I was like, oh man, Vlasic. I was like 6'8" guy, like trying this. And so I went up to him after. I said, how'd you do there? He's like, my abs are killing me. Like, he's like, you just have like a newfound respect for the players that do that. And so, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to be in the scrum when Stephen was talking, because Ethan Del Mastro was talking at the same time. But I in the background, I kept hearing laughs, and I heard like the guys was like, this guy is a PR spokesperson. Like he was very well spoken to the media. Is that what you had picked up on when you were over there?
He could be an example of media training to some of the guys in the room. He had it all. He was conducting holding court, I should say. His brother Patrick was there wearing a Corey Crawford jersey, and they FaceTimed Corey Crawford earlier in the day. So that was pretty cool. Used to see a lot of this back in the day during the Cup run, a lot of Make-A-Wish opportunities and things of that nature. And it's, these guys are given this unbelievable opportunity to play a game that they love for their living. And yeah, there's a lot of emotions riding on the games, but to see what they can do to those who are, trying to get through life and in their own battles. And we even see this with our colleague like Tony Granato or Troy Murray, just, what they go through, how they handle it, and then how once they're in this, I don't want to call it a fraternity, but when they've been in the battle, how they are open to helping others that are in the battle and bring them through. So Tony was there with Stephen today. He spent a lot of time with him and was talking to his dad and whatnot. So, hockey fights cancer. I think Eddie Olczyk has said it's the most important night of the year in the National Hockey League. All 32 teams take part in it. It's always special. It'll happen this weekend, and the Blackhawks have a lot of things planned for it. And Stephen will be a part of it. And he's his special young man, and you'll see it on CHSN on Friday when we put the spotlight on him, and Tony talks about their interaction in Countdown.
Yeah, it's always one of the best nights, but also a very emotional night where everyone around, I think it's like every fan gets like one of those hockey fights cancer cards. And I know the and the broadcast always picks it up, and you just see a sea of cards, and everyone has a name on there because everyone has been impacted by this, whether it's a friend, a family, you personally, like, someone that has been impacted by it. And so it's really a night that we can all galvanize and rally around the ones that have been fighting this battle.
On that note, I don't think we can top anything about what we saw with Stephen Foltin. Anything you got to say as we exit?
Nope. Let's we got some tough games for Chicago coming up here. Tampa and is it Minnesota on Sunday?
Minnesota on Sunday.
Yeah, Kaprizov's back, and so it's a fun, challenging test for Chicago, but they seemingly play those teams well.
Yeah, this is a stretch of 8 straight in the playoff mix, and this will be their third game in that stretch. So we'll see what happens. That is going to do it for us on the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast. For CHSM, for Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Thank you for listening and watching. We'll catch you next time.